this particular film. The 80s have been well established. We're deep into them. It's almost the 90s by this time. So, and I tend to feel with decades that it takes them a couple years to kind of find their footing and find their identity in terms of fashion, music, entertainment. You know, in the first couple of years, you're still getting a little bit of the bleed off from the decade immediately preceding you. But by the time you hit, you know, the 4s, 5s, 6s, and whatnot, you're established. You have found your identity, for better or worse. And Police Academy has been a signature of the 80s for much of its prime run. They are established now. They're deep in the cultural zeitgeist. People make reference to them. You know the actors. You know people like Michael Winslow, especially, something with that that identifiable. It's gone from just another raunchy comedy to a full-blown franchise. You know, it's got, at this point, this is now its 4th sequel. It's got a cartoon, action figures, comic books. You know, people know Police Academy. So, when we get to this point, and we're now getting ready for another Police Academy film, I'm sure the question had to come up in the writer room, or however they did this, of what do we do now? We have found kind of the comedic sweet spot of them at the physical Police Academy, but what else can we do? We've brought in new recruits, we've trained the populace. You know, there's not a lot more we can do except bring in more new recruits, and that's going to get stale. They also have to face the additional problem, as we talked about at the end of the last review, that they are dealing with a substantial loss of notable characters. You know, Sweet Check is gone, Zed is gone, which those, you know, no disrespect to those characters, but, you know, I don't think that was a huge loss, but they are down their primary leading man in Steve Guttenberg's Mahoney. And again, I know I spent the last several reviews just talking about how Mahoney was a terrible character, but he was a very recognizable part of the Police Academy family and franchise. So, and as his star kind of started to rise, he was someone who kind of gave the series a little bit of legitimacy. You know, I don't think this is quite the same. Actually, it might be at the time what they thought, but it's kind of like, we're going to do a Star Trek movie, but we don't have Captain Kirk. So, you know, so what do? So, this entire film feels like not so much a rebranding or a reboot, but it was a chance for them to do some things that they had never really done, or had done previously, but had not done to great success. So this was a second chance to do kind of what they attempted to do with Police Academy 2, only with more established characters, a more devoted audience. I mean, by this point, I think when you hit, you know, the 5 behind your name of the film, I think it's pretty clear that you have an audience. You've got a group of people who enjoy these films enough to keep coming back. So I think now that they are kind of in their comfort zone, this is a good time to break that comfort zone and say we're going to do some things we've never done. We're going to introduce a new leading man. We're going to actually have a plot, which we'll talk about. And more importantly than kind of all of that, we are going to actually take the police academy away from the physical police academy and send them on location and see what trouble they can get into when they're not kind of in their same familiar surroundings, which they kind of already aren't, but I'll talk about that here in a second. And that is the premise and the setup and the feeling you get when you take a look at Police Academy 5, Assignment Miami Beach.
We've uploaded Police Academy to your brain, the movies and the actual training.
They are funny, except for 5, Assignment Miami Beach.
That is correct.
I love the 80s. I love the 80s.
So, despite that bumper from Bob's Burgers, no, I don't think this film is unfunny, and I don't think it is by any means the worst of the series. But it is a substantial departure from what has come to be established as the Police Academy formula in a number of ways. The best way I kind of equate this film is, sometimes there's this little experiment I like to run, and that is take a television series, something that's been on the air for a substantial period of time, 5 seasons or more, and go back and watch the pilot episode, then watch the final episode. And I think in most instances you'll be struck by how different the show has become over the course of its run. And sometimes it's small differences, like you watch the very first episode of MASH versus the last episode of MASH. There are very few changes in the tone or the themes or the type of humor that they're doing, but almost the entire cast has changed. Look at the first episode of Seinfeld versus the final episode. Whereas you watch the first episode, it's clearly not the show that it would become. It's not the cultural 90s landmark that it would eventually be. It looks and feels very much like every other sitcom starring a comedian that's trying to find its legs and its identity versus the legacy it kind of developed and that they were celebrating in the last episode. It is an interesting measuring stick of how the show, the characters, the actors, the audience have evolved as it's been running. And while this is not the final Police Academy movie, I do believe it is a very clear marker as to how far the series has progressed and where it is at now versus where it began. I think that the style of humor is very different. Obviously, the cast has gone through a lot of changes, and the type of story they're telling is different. So we're going to hit on all of those, but just kind of keep that in mind that I don't think Police Academy 5 is a bad movie, and in fact, it may be a sentimental favorite. This is the first one I saw in the theaters. I remember, and I'm not quite sure why my mom and I decided to go see it, but we did, and I loved it, of course. That's kind of an indication of what I was talking about a second ago, which we'll reevaluate here in a little bit. But the formula has shifted, because it has to. Anything that runs this long, you've got to change it up a little bit. So we're going to hit each of those things in succession. But let's start with kind of one of the most obvious changes, and that the plot. And the biggest change is that there's a plot. That is a big change for this series. Whereas before, we talked about, when we looked at the very first film, one of the distinguishing characteristics of a Police Academy movie is that they don't really have plots or character arcs in the traditional sense. They're more scenarios that place our characters in a situation where they can be funny. They attempted to have a plot in Police Academy 2, and that didn't really flow well. And there are a number of reasons for that, and I think we've covered those already, but I also think that some of those reasons will become a bit more obvious when we look at what was added for this film. So let's talk about what is the story here of Police Academy 5. Well, it begins with Harris and Proctor, the outstanding comedy team, who really have a great outing in this film. But they are breaking into the commissioner's office and looking at Commandant Lassard's file, because Harris wants to force Lassard out, or find something to force Lassard out so he can take over the Police Academy. This is one of those things that, this is one of the issues you kind of run into with a long-running series like this, especially after there's been a big upheaval in cast turnover, or characters' positions, is that sometimes we don't get explanations as to why characters are doing what they're doing. When last we left Lassard, he was the captain of his own precinct. I mean, he was chasing the skateboard kids around because they dared to skateboard in his precinct. And he was simply filling in at the Police Academy because Lassard was going to a convention. But somewhere between those two films, and this has only been a year in between films, Lassard is not the captain of his own precinct anymore, and he's back at the Police Academy as Lassard. He's basically back where he started, being Lassard's second in command, and angling to get Lassard's job. So what happened? Why did he leave his precinct? Was he demoted? What happened there? And you'll find this is an issue with something else that's going to pop up, and that is, we've talked at length about the turnover in cast. The cast cycling in and out is nothing new for this series. We've had our ones and dones, and when they don't return for the next film, it's not necessarily a big question as to where are they and what they're doing. It's also not when it kind of makes sense why they wouldn't be there. Like, for example, and we talked about this during Police Academy 2, when they did their first assignment, it made sense that Lassard and Callahan weren't with them. They were trainers at the police academy, and if they're not at the police academy, there was no reason for Lassard or Callahan to be there with them. But it made sense for Callahan to return when they went back to the police academy, and it made sense that Harris wasn't there because it made sense that he got promoted and was doing his own thing. So in some instances, it makes sense when characters don't return. But when you have a major thing like the I'm just going to say it, the face of your franchise, the star of your franchise, Mahoney, is not there, and no one makes reference to him. Nobody mentions where he's at. There's nothing about what happened to this guy. It feels a little weird. It really does. Especially since there was such an emphasis in the previous films on how great Mahoney is, just how wonderful Mahoney is, and the whole, when they were in trouble in Police Academy 3, what was Lassard's solution? Mahoney! Let's find Mahoney! So here's this guy who's been your hero and your Hawkeye and and he's gone now and nobody says a word. And I understand why. It's a double-edged sword, because one of the arguments I made for why this series works so well as a series is they all work as standalone films. You don't have to have seen or have had the relationship with the characters through their previous adventures in order to enjoy the film that you're watching. So the fact that they don't take a lot of time worrying about where other people are or how things transition from one film to the next has been part of its strength for allowing new audience to come in. But for long-running audiences and long-running fans, which, again, for a film that's now 5 deep in its series, you have to assume there is a fan base. And there are people who have been watching these movies since the beginning, or fairly close. You've got to believe. I'm sure they have questions like, where's Mahoney? Maybe they could have just tossed a line out about him getting promoted, or he's a detective now, or he's undercover, or he quit. I don't know. It is just kind of interesting that they never mention him again. But yeah, that's kind of the weird thing about these movies as they transition from new cast members to old. Anyway, sorry, kind of got off on a tangent there. But, 5 movies in, this is the kind of shit you notice. Anyway, so the plot. So Harris is looking for something he can use against Lassard, and he discovers that Lassard reached the mandatory age for retirement a year ago. And he, of course, shares this information with the commissioner, who informs Lassard at the graduation of the latest class at the police academy, which includes our only returning recruit from part 4, House, once again played by Tab Thacker. He informs Lassard there that he is going to be retired. And this feels like the kind of thing that maybe you should tell someone in private first. Kind of like when they did it in Police Academy 3, and they're like, oh yeah, we're going to shut down one of these academies. Thought you might like to know here at this celebration. So yeah, a touch insensitive, I feel. But anyway, he informs Lassard that he's going to have to retire, and that he's going to be honored at the policeman's convention in Miami Beach. So there you go. That's how we get to Miami Beach. And Lassard invites his favorite recruits, his staff, his friends, to come with him. So this includes all of our major characters who haven't yet left the series. So that's Hightower, Jones, Tackleberry, Callahan, Hooks, and now House. And I think that's all of them. I don't think I'm missing anybody. Yeah, I'm not missing anybody. Harris and Proctor come along because Harris wants to suck up to the commissioner and prove that he has the respect of his fellow officers and that he'd be a good leader, and so that he can get promoted to commandant and take over the academy. So there's your basic pitch. Okay, not a bad concept to kind of frame a film around. But again, Police Academy 5 is going that extra mile, and they actually have a storyline running through here. So as this is happening, a gang of jewel thieves steal some valuable diamonds, and they are on their way to Miami Beach to, pass them off to the person who hired them. During travel, the bag with the diamonds, which they've hidden inside a camcorder. Young people, ask your parents or look it up on the internet what a camcorder is. The bag gets switched with Lassard's, and so they spend the rest of the movie trying to get the diamonds back from an unknowing Lassard. And that is our framing device, which leads into the rest of the film. Not a bad idea. And I think it has a couple of things that the original attempt at moving them away from the police academy did not. First of all, before I get into that, I do have to say, you will probably notice if you watch these movies like I have been doing in succession, that they must not have been able to get the building that the police academy originally was, because the police academy itself, the physical academy, has transformed from a very large, spacious, almost college-looking building to a small, bright pink building. So, I don't know what the story is there, but it's very noticeable. Anyway, so where does this one go right? What does it do right? The last attempt in 2 failed. And I think the first thing is they have a set of villains with a clear goal and an objective in mind. There is something they are trying to accomplish that directly involves our heroes, that when they become aware of it finally, it affects them and they become part of the plot. Now, it takes all the way up till Act 3 for that to happen, but that's okay, because the rest of the film is them just hanging around Miami Beach and getting into shenanigans. But these guys, unlike Zed's gang in Police Academy 2, these guys have an objective, they have a time clock, they have a goal in mind. 2, it was just random ne'er-do-wells doing random ne'er-do-well things, and there was no greater purpose, no greater goal, no time clock really on what they were trying to accomplish, because they weren't trying to accomplish anything. And so with that, there is no real structure. And if you're going to take them out of the police academy and away from the kind of episodic nature of going to event to event to event, you have to have some kind of structure for them to bounce off of. And this one does. Also, I want to note, we're going to talk about the new characters here in a second, but I want to note that the leader of the gang, the head bad guy in this one, is played by noted character actor Rene Auberjonois, who, if you've watched TV and movies in the last, 40, 50 years, you have seen something Rene Auberjonois has been a part of. Of course, he was the original Father Mulcahy in the movie MASH. He was on that show Benson for a number of years. Younger viewers probably recognize his voice because he's been in a lot of different animated series, including Avatar: The Last Airbender. He played the inventor in that one, the one who built the flying wheelchair for his son when they move into the air temple. I think he played a different character in The Legend of Korra, but I don't remember. Of course, nerds like me will always recognize him as Constable Odo from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. So it is a testament to him as an actor and his very eclectic career that several generations can pick a film or a television show that he had a direct part in. His career spans not just years but generations. I think that is the mark of a great actor, and he really was just an amazing character actor. If I didn't know what he looked like, I wouldn't have recognized him in that. That is such a stupid sentence. That is such a stupid... If I didn't know what he looked like, I wouldn't recognize him. Yeah, well, duh. But I hope that my meaning is clear. That, you know, he blends into this character, this heavily tan, slimy, you know, slicked back black hair, tiny mustache, never looking like no version of him that I'd ever seen. So it's again a testament to him as a performer. But he's not the only new cast member. We have to talk about this because when they arrive in Miami Beach, they meet Lassard's nephew, Nick, Sergeant Nick Lassard. And Nick Lassard is, for all intents and purposes, he is meant to be our new Mahoney. So how's he do at that? Well, we'll talk about that. So Nick Lassard, first off, is played by Matt McCoy, who is another one, a kind of a career character actor with a resume as long as your arm. He's been on, just kind of like David Goffin, we talked about his career. If there's a show, 10-1, Matt McCoy guest starred on it at some point. Probably best known outside of the Police Academy series as George Costanza's boyhood rival Lloyd Braun on 2 episodes of Seinfeld. One of these actors who's good, but not what you'd call readily memorable. And I don't mean that as a slam. I mean it as he is a character actor. He's recognizable in his voice and his face, but he's not really name above the title material. And again, that's not a bad thing. That's not a slam. As you can tell by looking him up on IMDb, he's made a good living and had a lengthy career because of that. Here's the thing, and I think they realized it, but we'll show some evidence of that in a second. Matt McCoy is not a Mahoney type. And as a result, Nick Lassard is not a Mahoney type. And it feels almost like during the course of the filming of this movie, of course they film things out of order, but it feels like during the writing and the filming of this movie, they decided that no, he is not. Because when we first meet him, a couple of his first scenes, he is very Mahoney. One of the first things we see him do when he's kind of hanging out with the rest of the cast is he goes up and gives an unasked for, unsolicited back rub to a woman at the pool who turns out to be our other new character. I'll talk about her in a second. And she kind of backflips him into the pool. She becomes she's the new Mahoney girl, even though there's no Mahoney. And it reads just as creepy and wrong as when Mahoney did it, but it also reads as just startlingly out of character. We've only known this guy for a few minutes, but just from his mannerisms, his portrayal, the way he holds himself, the way he responds to George Gaynes in a scene they have just prior to this, he's not that type of character. You can just see it. And it is just so plain that their initial note was, just make him a new Mahoney. Just do what Mahoney does. If you need proof of that, let's take a listen to the two scenes. The first one, let's listen to the very first scene Mahoney was ever in the original Police Academy.
Find a spot, dickhead. Dickhead? That's right. Where's the manager? Dickhead? Park the car, butt breath. Butt breath? Yeah.
Now, this is the very first time that Nick Lassard interacts with Captain Harris.
Captain Harris, hey, I didn't see you there. You know, I don't think we've been introduced. My name's Nick.
I don't care who you are, but what? Just get out of my son.
Butt wipe?
Scram, sleazeball.
Okay, fine. Butt wipe, huh? Haven't heard that in a while.
It is virtually identical. The thing that sets him off is someone calling him a adolescent name, and he decides to go prank him. It is almost word for word the exact same scene. But again, Matt McCoy, I gave Guttenberg a lot of shit for Mahoney. And again, I don't believe unjustifiably. But at the same time, he fit that role a million times better than Matt McCoy did. And it feels like the writers and the director and the actor realized that, because when they stopped trying to make him this scuzzy, ladies' man wannabe, when they stopped trying to make him Mahoney 2.0 and just let him be him, it felt like the character found his footing. In all his other scenes, he feels very natural and very real, and he feels like he fits his role in the comedy troupe very well, when they just kind of let him have his everyman kind of charm and not try to be, Mahoney. And what role is that? Well, I think Matt McCoy uniquely suited for this, because he is something that the Police Academy series has never had up to this point, but one that they desperately need for a change in formula like this one. Matt McCoy's Nick Lassard is the straight man. There is nothing really comical about him. He is the down to business, by the book cop. And this is the character that he plays. And you see this throughout the film and throughout the later film that he's going to appear in, that he is the one that moves the plot forward. He is the one that keeps things moving so that the rest of the cast is free to just do what they do. We used this example previously, but it bears repeating. It's like in the original Pirates of the Caribbean movie, you needed Orlando Bloom and Keira Knightley to be the anchors of the film and move the plot along. They did the heavy lifting with stakes and ticking clock and goals and all of that. This left Johnny Depp's Jack Sparrow free to just prance around and be funny. Whereas in later films, when he didn't have that framing, those films are a lot weaker because he doesn't have someone else to move the plot for him. Same thing, this was the theory behind why in the early Abbott and Costello movies, that the studio would put in these boy-girl romance subplots, which almost felt like they existed in another movie. The early Abbott and Costello films feel like you're watching two movies that have been smashed together, because the romance, the boy-girl stories, were there to move the plot, leaving Bud and Lou free to just, go from routine to routine. So Matt McCoy works best, and he serves this purpose. I think he's something that they needed in this film, and that they're really going to need in the next one. So when they stopped trying to make him Mahoney and just let him be Nick Lassard, goody two-shoes super cop, the character works, and he works well with the other characters. And what's great is that by now, and this is one of the things I like about watching these movies close together like this, by now the other characters and the other actors have all bonded. They know each other. The characters know each other. They have a formula. They have a connection. And they're able to kind of weave him in to that family fairly seamlessly. I don't think the movie suffers for the lack of Mahoney. I think with the kind of story they're trying to tell, having someone more by the book and someone who can move the needle, that is actually much more what they needed. I don't think if Steve Guttenberg had come back, I don't know how well he would have fit into that role. I just don't think that was, despite how much they praised Mahoney, I don't think that was the character, and I don't think it would have felt real. Maybe I'm wrong, but anyway, so Nick Lassard, Matt McCoy, a welcome new addition to the Police Academy family. On that, we have another new addition. Of course, we have the Mahoney girl, who, again, there's no Mahoney, but she is essentially the same thing that that all of the young ladies leading up, that Sharon Stone was, that Kim Cattrall was, that Jill from Baywatch was. She is that person there to kind of be a love interest for Mahoney / Nick. And this is Kate. Kate, who has, as far as I can tell, no last name. They never refer to her as Officer whatever. I looked on most forums I could find, and yeah, there is no mention of a last name for this character. So she just plays Kate. Kate is played by Janet Jones. What a name. Whose off-camera life is way more interesting than anything she does on screen. So I'm going to give you this very briefly. So Janet Jones is married to hockey legend Wayne Gretzky, whom she met when he was a judge on Dance Fever in 1984. And they got married, long story short. And his decision to be traded from, I forget which team he was on, but it was a fairly big news in the hockey world at the time that he was moving and being traded to Los Angeles, to the Kings. This was done for her. He did this, was kind of her stipulation for him marrying her, that he had to get traded and they had to, so that she could continue her career. And I don't think that's an unnecessarily tough ask. I don't think that's unreasonable. And kudos to him for doing it, for not, just saying, no, you're my wife and you're going to live where I live or whatever. So, yeah, kudos to both of them. I have no problem with that arrangement. I will say that, hindsight is 20/20, that, he had to move there so as to not disrupt her career, and her career never really careered. Like the most notable film she's been in, other than this one, was she was in A League of Their Own, where she plays one of the pitchers Like, not even a named character, not even on the Rockford Peaches, not even on the main team. You know? But, you know, you don't know that, you know. So, I don't begrudge them that. But here's the funny part. In 2006, Miss Jones here and a half a dozen NHL players were implicated from the New Jersey Board of Gaming for having run an illegal gambling ring. Supposedly placing crooked bets on a number of sporting events, including the Super Bowl. Yeah, so I tried to find more details about this, and really couldn't. It would have taken a long time to suss out all the timeline. That's someone else's podcast. That's not me. But I just think it's interesting that what she's probably best known for is being indicted in a sports betting scandal. So, you know, if you're not going to be famous, you can at least be infamous. Anyway, none of that really matters to what's going on screen. So, Kate, she's okay as a character. Again, I will say I think she has more on-screen presence, and she is allowed to do more than any of the previous Mahoney girls that have kind of filled out similar spots in the roster over the course of the film. She's able to participate a bit more in the action. We see that she's a karate instructor, so she's very integral to the final action scene. So yeah, she has a little bit more character than some of the other ones, which is nice. She's also, you can kind of see the evolution of the mindset a little bit. Whereas before, and this is one of my complaints about the films, you know, Mahoney's sexual harassment was met with kind of, oh, how dare you, but you're kind of cute, you know, or the worst one is Jill going, oh my goodness, you know what, you were just trying to be cute. I shouldn't have gotten mad at your sleazy come-ons. Kate at least takes Nick Lassard and hip checks him into the pool, you know, and when they're doing karate demonstrations, she kind of kicks his ass a little bit. So, you know, she's not really taking it as much. So, you know, hooray for progress. Minimal progress, but progress. So yeah. So that's a good segue into something I was talking about previously in the lead up, is that with this film, we see just where the series has progressed to over the course of its life. And this is something that we started to see in the previous movie. I made a big deal of it there, that I believe that Warner Brothers and the producers and all of that had discovered that their primary audience, the people who were enjoying these movies the most, were in fact kids. That, you know, the college students and young adults they had made the original for, you know, the raunchy comedy, had of course moved on to other raunchy comedies, which there was no shortage of in the 80s. But the youth, the young people like myself who had fallen in love with the films and the characters, had kept the film series alive. And we see, I think in this one, it is more obvious than ever. We saw the first hints of it in number 4, but I feel like here it is more obvious than ever that the primary focus has changed, and that now they are trying to appeal to a youth audience. You ask, you know, I don't think I even have to do a segment of how offended should I be for this this one because there's nothing really offensive in it. You know, there's a side of, you know, Proctor's butt cheeks when he goes water skiing. There's a somewhat creepy scene where Harris is hitting on a woman much younger than him, and that's just skin crawling. But in terms of objectionable things, there really isn't any. And the humor has, I guess the only way to say has regressed to be much more slapsticky and to appeal more to the sensibility of kids. There are two great examples of this. The first is the aforementioned first interaction between Nick and Harris, where Harris is trying to get a suntan. He insults Nick, and Nick goes and gets some sunblock and writes dork on Harris's chest so that when he wakes up, you know, that part of his chest has been left untanned, so he has dork written across his chest, and he's just walking along the beach and everyone's going,
Hello, dork.
Hey, what's happening, dork?
Hey, dork.
Hey,
dork.
Hey, dork. Check this out. Hey, dork.
And I'm going to tell you this, folks. I was a kid in the 80s. I grew up in the 80s. That's why I'm doing this series. And I can tell you, I never, ever in all of my life heard anybody above the age of 12 call anyone a dork. Never once. It was a term that was strictly used by kids. I have never heard another adult call I never heard an adult call another adult a dork. This is a line and this is a sensibility that was put in there because their audience was made of kids. You cannot convince me otherwise. You know, I mean, you could have switched it out for jerk or fool, or you know, you could have used any number of, you know, politically incorrect terms, but they went with dork. So this says to me that they knew who their audience was. So that's number one. We also see it in a scene with Tackleberry and Callahan where he is trying out some of the new guns being demonstrated at the convention.
So you need to share those weapons with the other officers. No, I need these.
Let me talk to him. Eugene, I'll get you some of your very own just as soon as we get home.
You promise?
Cross my heart.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is you can't convince me that scene was not added because little kids could recognize it. That young kids could recognize and go, aha, you know, I've done that, or you know, that's some, you know, or that we could recognize he's acting like a baby. You know, this is nothing in any previous Police Academy movie have we seen any indication that Tackleberry behaved like this. As much as he loved guns, as much as he enjoyed them, you never saw him act like a kid around them. You know, it just is not something that was ever in the character. But because they have started aiming these films at a much younger audience, this is where the character kind of ends up. And I want to make this very clear. The fact that they started aiming these films at kids, the fact that the humor is now very much on the level of kids at the time is not a bad thing. I would go so far as to postulate that it is probably one of the reasons the series has endured and why it hasn't kind of fallen aside like a lot of other comedies of the time. I think because they knew who their audience was and deliberately aimed for it, I think it helped keep the series going and helped keep it fresh in our minds. So, and we see this also with the bad guys in the film. The bad guys are basically lugheads, and they're kind of like the dark versions of the Police Academy, though we're going to get our dark versions of them in the next movie. But, you know, they're just as bumbling, they're just as stupid, you know, they love bodily. That's another thing. There's a much greater emphasis on bodily functions like farting, which they had in other films, but, you know, they really give it a centerpiece here. So yeah, I think that is something that we definitely see in this film. As for the rest of it, the film itself is, I think, very enjoyable. I like this one a lot. I like that, again, all the characters feel like they're balanced. We get to see them do their thing and do their bit, and they all get their moment in the sun as the film kind of progresses. Even House, who didn't get a lot of as much screen time as the others by this stage, he still gets his moment. Now, the film kind of jumps into high gear in the third act. And this is not unusual. This has kind of been a staple of the Police Academy formula. We haven't really talked about it much, but yeah, part of their formula is a very action-focused third act. You know, in the first one it was the ride. In the second one it was raiding Zed's hideout. The third one it was all jet skis. The fourth one it was, you know, hot air balloons and airplanes. And this one we get, you know, what are they called? The boats with the propeller. I forget what they're called. No, not pontoon boat. I forget. But you know what I mean. We have a chase through the Florida Everglades on there, and we have kind of one of the most endearing moments of the film. So at the big convention where they're going to honor Lassard, and Lassard has been asking all through the movie, what is the police demonstration procedure going to be? What's it going to be this year? So giving us this indication that they do some kind of elaborate demonstration, like a fake robbery or something like that at these things every year. Well, at the event, Rene Aubergenois finally just loses his cool and tries to steal the camera from Lassard, spilling the diamonds everywhere and blowing their cover, and he and his men have to take Lassard hostage and use him to kind of escape the building. Lassard believes that the entire thing is this demonstration and is just going along with it and having the absolute time of his life. And this is kind of an example of the series aiming down at kids a little bit, because it does kind of give you that impression of how could this guy not know what was happening. But this creates one of the most endearing aspects of this film, is this third act hostage situation where Lassard is helping his kidnappers. He's like giving them advice and telling them what to do, and they form like reverse Stockholm syndrome with him. They like really like him, and it is such a sweet, very, I don't know what it is, and I have to give all the credit to George Gaynes on this one. We've talked about him in the previous films, and that one of the great things about Lassard is how lovable and how likable of a character he is. And this is kind of the most he's had to do in one of these movies up to this point. And boy, he is just milking it and having you can tell the actor is having just as much fun as the character is, and it shows. And that's something that is very true of George Gaynes' career. So let's take a really quick detour now that we're kind of in this stage of the review, and let's talk a little bit about the life of George Gaynes, because what a fascinating person this guy really was.
Gnarly.
So George Gaynes was born May 16th, 1917 in Helsinki. This is back when it was part of the Grand Duchy of Finland. I hope I'm saying all that right, which was part of the Roman Empire. He lived in France in 1940 when the Germans invaded, and when they marched in, he was able to get out. He bounced around to a couple of different places, originally intending to return to the Netherlands and join the Dutch resistance, but ended up in the United Kingdom and enlisted in the Royal Dutch Navy. So quite a fascinating tale. Like I'm summarizing here. So the fact that he bounced around to all these different places, he had a fairly distinguished service record during the war. I mean, that's a fascinating life. You could make a movie just about that, and I kind of wish someone could. Other really fascinating aspects of his life, he was multilingual, speaking Dutch, English, French, Italian, and Russian. I can barely speak English. And this guy is fluent in 5 languages. That is astonishing to me that anybody can do that. But it seems like he was fairly worldly and lived all over the place, so you kind of have to. He would eventually end up in New York and worked some odd jobs, eventually finding his way to Broadway, kind of by accident. You know, it is one of those things where he was discovered. An American theater director just offered him a role in a Broadway musical because of just the way he performed, and he became an American citizen in 1948 when he moved there to star in this Broadway musical. He had a long and distinguished Broadway career. Shows like Wonderful Town, which is the musical version of My Sister Eileen. He would alternate between musicals and comedies and dramatic plays. He was in Wonderful Town. He was in a Cole Porter musical. He would take over the touring role of Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady, so taking it over from Rex Harrison in 1964. He would also appear on a lot of daytime dramas, so a lot of soap operas, you know, Search for Tomorrow, General Hospital, you know. So he was all over the place. I already spoke about this in a previous video, but I do think it bears repeating. Probably what he is best known for, if not the Police Academy series. I think when I've seen him in other things, like I recognize him from the Mel Brooks movie To Be or Not to Be, one of my all-time favorite movies. He's in several other shows, and but every time I see him, there's 2 things that come to mind. Oh, it's Commandant Lassard, and oh, it's Punky Brewster's dad. So, yeah, on television, he is probably best known for playing Henry Wormont, the foster father of Punky Brewster. And, again, I covered this. It's been said, but I think when you're talking about a man's career and a man's life, you've got to reiterate just what an impact he had. Especially when you consider that shows like, Different Strokes or Webster or Punky Brewster, the concept of foster families was still not as widely understood or known by the mainstream pop culture as it would eventually become, and especially on TV. We were still, most sitcoms especially, still focused on the traditional nuclear family. But Punky Brewster was one of the first ones to introduce the idea of a foster father, and I think, moreover, what made it even more interesting is that he was a single foster father. This was not a married man. He was also not well-to-do. He wasn't a rich guy taking in some sassy, street orphans. He was a regular guy with, basic means, all by himself, and trying to take care of this kid. It was revolutionary for the time, and and as we see with Commandant Lassard, there is just something immediately lovable and nurturing and calming about George Gaynes as a presence. And I can tell you, having watched Punky Brewster as a kid, I can't say I remember it as well as I remember some of the other shows I used to watch, but I do remember specific episodes. Having watched that show, he is one of those TV dads that really had an impact on you. That this was a guy you felt the love from. And I think that just has to do with the kind of person George Gaynes was and the kind of persona that he had. Sadly, passed away in 2016, but at the age of 98. So he led a very long and fascinating life. So, and we're going to say this a couple times, sadly, today, because that is, as we get through these, we'll hear that so many of these police academy stars are no longer with us. So, for the first time, this review, George Gaynes, Commandant Lassard, we salute you. Thank you, sir.
Red.
So, one of the high points of this film, so after we go through all of it, and again, I think it's a fairly enjoyable movie. I think everybody plays their part well. There's some genuine laugh out loud moments. I especially like, one thing, I don't know if I've touched on this yet, but one of the things I really enjoy about these last couple Police Academy movies is because these characters have been together for so long, you start to see the relationships between them, the camaraderie, and even though they really don't have a lot of interaction outside of the Police Academy, you can tell that Tackleberry and Callahan have a relationship, that House and Hightower have a relationship, that, Hooks and Callahan have a friendship, that the bonds have grown, and even though they don't need to dedicate a lot of screen time to it, you can definitely feel it. But a couple of great things happen towards the end. So at the end of the film, after they chase down the bank robber, the jewel thieves, they rescue Lassard. He finally figures out that it's a real kidnapping and not a staged one, and he beats the shit out of Rene Auberjonois, which, again, awesome. At the end of the film, of course, to give us a happy ending, they decide to not force Lassard to retire, that he showed so much grace and leadership and all this during this ordeal that he still has things to teach incoming students, and that they're going to let him just stay at the police academy until he decides he's ready to retire. So that's our great happy ending. But another wonderful moment happens for one of our long-term characters, someone that we've been following since the first film. In recognition for his heroism during the rescue of Lassard and Harris eventually ends up being kidnapped as well. But And in the course of rescuing him, Harris ends up in the water, and a gator's coming after him, and Hightower jumps into the water and wrestles the gator, which is, a sentence I just said. But in recognition for this, Hightower is promoted to Lieutenant Hightower, and he's the first of our Academy graduates from the first movie to achieve that rank. And from an audience standpoint, for the people who have followed these films from the beginning, I think that was something that everybody found very cathartic, because even from the very first movie, Hightower seemed to be the one most destined to be a cop, and most destined to be a good cop. So the fact that he gets that recognition and he gets that promotion, I think, is a testament to the writing of the character, how vital he has been to this series, and to the audience affection for him. Because you do feel it. I definitely felt it, and I knew it was coming, but I was looking forward to that moment when he got his promotion. And when he finally did, I was just like, yay! You feel like that's your friend getting the promotion. And none of this could really have happened if it wasn't for the portrayal of Bubba Smith, the true gentle giant of this franchise. And I called him the backbone or the heart of it back in the original review, and I stand by that. He is kind of the soul of this franchise and the soul of this team, and that's just done through sheer presence and little things that the actor brings to it. So I do want to take a few minutes here, and since we are kind of getting towards the end of these, and let's talk about Bubba Smith. So for those who don't know, Bubba Smith began his career as a football player, a very accomplished one. First, let's say this, just for the record, he stood 6'7". That's a giant. But anyway, a very gifted athlete. He attended Michigan State University. He was an All-American in 1965 and 1966. Very popular athlete at the University at Michigan State. I'm sorry if I said the wrong one. It's Michigan State University. But became a very popular player there. So much so that it became very popular at the games for there to be a chant called "Kill Bubba Kill." So yeah, he is permanently etched into the history of college football. His final game at Michigan State was a 10-10 tie with Notre Dame at the Spartan Stadium. This is November 19th, 1966. Both teams were undefeated and untied, and they ranked in the nation's top schools. All right. This game has been hyped throughout the years as the game of the century. So for the big football pundits, the big sport, the big college football pundits, this is like one of the most important games in history that he played a pivotal role in. So successful was he that he was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame, and they retired. Michigan State retired his jersey number 95. He was drafted number 1. He was the overall draft pick in 1967, being taken by the Baltimore Colts. He had a very extensive NFL career playing for the Colts, the Raiders, and the Houston Oilers. As a defensive end, he played in the Super Bowl twice in his first 5 seasons. And he was selected as an All-Pro 1 year, All-Conference for 2 years, and he went to 2 Pro Bowls. I mean, this is an outstanding resume. Acting-wise, he didn't do as much. He had a few small bit roles here and there. Probably most notably, he had a memorable guest spot on Married with Children. But nothing ever really eclipsed his time as Moses Hightower. Sadly, though, he did not have a very long life. And his last years were not incredibly happy. But he died in his home. He was found by his caretaker August 3rd, 2011. He died from acute drug intoxication and heart disease. It was later discovered when they did further research on his brain with his family's consent that he suffered from CTE, which is chronic traumatic, I'm going to mispronounce this word, encephalopathy. So I apologize for butchering that. So yeah, he was one of the ones when they started to talk about concussions and repeated head trauma. He was one of the ones, along with at least 345 other NFL players who were diagnosed with this after their deaths. So sadly, not a very long life, but what an impactful one. What a way this is a person who made an impact on both Hollywood and with one role, really. Like, again, he did other things. He was in some other things here and there, but nothing really ever topped Moses Hightower. And, you know, his sports achievements are second to none. So, not a long life, but an eventful one and an impactful one. And I think sometimes that's the best we can hope for. So, so Mr. Bubba Smith, for everything you did and for providing the soul of this franchise, sir, I salute you.
Totally.
Before we wrap up, I do want to shed light on one other cast member who, this is going to be his final appearance in a Police Academy movie, which I'm sad about because I really liked him, and I know we only have really one more big cast Police Academy movie, but I would have liked to have seen him back. But this is going to be the final appearance for Tab Thacker's house, which, again, I'm sad about. I really liked how they expanded on him in this one. I like how, once again, they do make a little bit more of an issue of his size, but I love how everything, in keeping with one of the overarching themes of the Police Academy films, I love how his size is something he uses to his advantage. You know, he uses it as crowd control. You know, he's one person controlling an entire crowd. There's this great scene when they're rescuing Sard, where he's running, he draws the short straw and has to go up the steps, and he just pushes the door open and crushes the bad guy behind it. So I liked House, and I'm sad we only got him for 2 movies, but you know, what a delightful character. So I do want to talk a little bit about Tab Thacker. Like Bubba Smith, he was an accomplished athlete. He was a football, basketball player. He was in track and field. He was in wrestling. You know, so he had a lot of athletic ability, and you can see it. Even though he's a big guy, he moves very, very smoothly. You can tell that there is athletic prowess there. He won the NCAA Division I Wrestling Heavyweight National Championship in 1984 as a senior. He was 4-time Atlantic Coast Conference champion of the Wolfpack. He finished his college wrestling career with a 92-11-1 record. That is really impressive. He's another one that did not have a very long career as an actor. He only had a few films to his name. The first film he was in was a very little-known Clint Eastwood movie. And Clint Eastwood basically noticed him when thumbing through Time magazine and noticed that he was, 6'4" and 450 pounds. And basically got him the role in this movie, and that would eventually lead to other films, most notably outside of House. He was in the Goldie Hawn movie Wildcats, where she's a college football coach. We might try to visit that one here on this show, so I don't know yet. Have to see if I can find a copy of it. But yeah, again, not a very long life. Only 45 years old when he passed away in 2007. And kind of the downside to being as big as he was is that it brings a lot of health complications. He had failing health for years. He developed diabetes. They had to amputate his foot. So yeah, the last couple years were not really great to him, and that's never happy to hear. But one of the great things about film and about films like these is that we can always kind of remember him and that big smile he had, and just the joy he took from being on screen. It just feels like when he was on screen, when it was his time to do his bit, that he was just having the time of his life. And you can see it, that translates to the audience, and that just makes this character very lovable. So, again, not a long life, not a long Hollywood career, but one that leaves a delightful character for us. So, once more, Tad Thacker, thank you so much, and I salute you. Okay, so I know that got a little heavy, but, that's one of the downsides to reviewing films that are, at this point, getting up there in age, is that a lot of the cast can sometimes have fallen away, and that's very sobering. But again, they leave a deep legacy, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of these folks that we haven't gotten to in the next one. So let's wrap this up. So, as I've said, not the worst of these by a long shot. I think this is actually a very charming entry in the series. I think it is fresh and inventive. I think they bring the new character, specifically Nick Lassard, in just the right way. Once they kind of get a handle on him, there's a little bit of a false start, but once they kind of figure out what they're doing with him, they make him a valuable member of the team. And yeah, I just had a real good time rewatching this one. So despite what Robostash might say,
They are funny, except for 5. Assignment Miami Beach.
That is correct.
I do think this one is funny, and I think it is a welcome addition to the series. However, all good things must come to an end. And by this point, as stated at the top of this review, by this time, the Police Academy movies have been around for almost half a decade. Coming out one a year, that's pretty impressive. Fast and Furious and Saw movies these days are the only things that really come out that quickly. But the 80s are starting to wind down. And despite a breath of fresh air from this entry, the series is starting to wind down. you can tell they're grasping. There's not much more they can do. So they're going to make one last gasp and give us what, I don't know if they knew it was going to be the last one, but it does feel like there's some finality to it, and give us one last great send-off with our friends from the Metropolitan Police Academy. And this time, they are going to go out by taking down the most ruthless gang the fair city has ever seen. So, you will have to join me next time when we take a look at Police Academy 6, City Under Siege. So, until that time, thank you for joining me. Hope you're enjoying these reviews. And as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.